Now, we're starting this week with our debate. After 15 people were arrested following violent clashes outside a Merseyside hotel accommodating asylum seekers, a group of charities have said that this could be just the tip of the iceberg. In an open letter coordinated by Coalition Campaign Together with Refugees, they warned that the disorders seen in Merseyside last Friday could be repeated across the country. The charities said that people in the asylum system had already suffered terribly, fleeing war and persecution in places like Afghanistan, Sudan, Syria and Iran, and said Britain's asylum system was broken. Now, this letter, which has more than 100 signatories, criticised language and policies that demonise people seeking refuge in the UK, fanning the flames of division. So today, we ask, does Britain demonise migrants? And joining me to discuss this is Sonia Skeet, the Chief Executive of Freedom for Torture, research analyst and writer Dr. Rakib Ehsan, David Hardman from the Methodist Church, and Emma Webb, broadcaster and the UK director of the Common Sense Society. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. I mean, this is a topic that we have discussed here before, and I'm going to start with you, Rakib, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This letter had some powerful language in it, and it does say that there's a high risk of more attacks. This is on the rise against asylum seekers. What do you think it says about us as a country, that people fleeing war, looking for safety, are finding violence here?
Well, I'd make the point that if we're talking about a broken system, I look at it a little bit differently. So in recent times, we've seen that a significant portion of those crossing the English Channel via small boats are coming from Albania. Now, Albania hasn't experienced a conflict since the civil war in 1997. Earlier this month, it was reported that the third largest cohort crossing the English Channel were Indians. So I think that this narrative that every single person crossing into the UK is fleeing war and immediate forms of persecution, I think it's somewhat flawed.
And among those who signed the letter, David, you signed that. What made you sign it?
Well, I think I'd just like to say that the figures also show that 76% of the people that cross in small boats actually have their asylum claims upheld. And so actually I think the narrative is that actually people are coming to this country who are fleeing the dangers. And I think as people of faith, as we recognise that actually human beings are made in the image of God, and that people who are fleeing persecution need to find sanctuary, they need to find safety. And so as a Methodist church, and as the other churches we work with the Baptists, the URC, we actually wanted to say to our leaders, look, actually there's a responsibility in the language you have to be compassionate, a language to recognise that when people are in need, they need a space where they can feel safe. So we don't want to hear words about like invasion, we don't want to hear the deputy Conservative saying, that charities that are working with refugees are as bad as people smugglers. That's language that fans the flames of hatred that actually these people just need some security.
Emma, what do you think of the language that was used? We're talking about Suella Braverman saying back in November that there was this invasion on our shores. Do you think that this is inciting this type of behaviour?
No, so I think that when it comes to Knowsley in particular, the thing that seemed to really spark what happened there was this video circulating online of a young girl being propositioned by a 25-year-old migrant. The girl's 15 years old. And so that seems to be the thing that really sparked it and really hit a nerve. And I think that there's, if anything, it's not so much the government's language around this, it's the government's failed policies. I think people are feeling really frustrated, particularly given that what red wall areas and working class areas have 7 times as many migrants put in those areas, and those areas that are really suffering with housing crisis, the housing crisis, with the cost of living crisis, and it's building up all of this frustration. And actually, I think the inflammatory language is on the other side. I think that people who have made reasonable criticisms of migration policy, who just want reasonable limits placed on migration, and every poll, time after time, poll after poll, election after election, the British public express a desire to reduce immigration, and nothing has resulted from that. The government hasn't been listening. And so I think that a lot of these people are being labelled as far right when actually they're just making reasonable criticisms. So if we want to actually deal with all of this frustration that's building up, we have to have a rational conversation about it and acknowledge that people who want to have limits on migration are not lacking in compassion. They're not far right or fascist or unreasonable. It's actually the view of the majority of the British public, and it's not one extreme or the other. It's not either open borders or no immigration at all.
You know, you said reasonable criticism there. It's fair to say that it's anger that we're seeing, Sonia, though. People are very, very angry.
Well, people in the community in Knowsley, a small proportion of them were angry. They took to the streets last Friday night and we saw terrible, terrible consequences. They have been whipped up by far-right groups who have been organising in these and other areas, and they're doing so with a sense of permission from ministers and other senior leaders in government who've been using desperately inflammatory language over a very long period. Just last month, the Holocaust survivor Joan Salter appealed to our Home Secretary to stop this rhetoric, and she flatly refused. Joan's warning was that violent language leads to violent acts, and that's exactly what we saw last Friday night. But I would really like to stress that there are many people in communities across this country, including in deprived areas, who reject anti-refugee politics and who have just as many problems as we do with the inflammatory rhetoric, and who have been coming together to show their support for refugees through the Together with Refugees coalitions, but also in all kinds of small acts taking place all across this country every day to make sure that Britain remains a place that welcomes people fleeing torture and persecution.
For those who would say, though, that these are economic migrants, that's the argument a lot of people have made in the past, and we heard that from you too, of course. And then you too, of course. And then we are in a cost of living crisis. So a lot of people do feel that they're not getting looked after in the same way.
What I would say, as we heard from David, is that the vast majority of those people coming across on boats are people who, when their asylum claims are looked at, are found to genuinely be fleeing problems in the world such as torture and persecution. So this narrative that the people on these boats are economic migrants is false, and it is peddled by ministers. And this is why we hold ministers politically responsible for the feelings that are being unleashed in communities. And what I would say is that it is absolutely the case that millions of households across this country are struggling to put food on their tables and to heat their homes. And this government desperately wants those people to think that this is the fault of refugees. But our viewers know that this is not the case. The problems are a result of government policies, and it is time for them to halt the inflammatory language and to halt the anti-refugee policies which are causing people to feel this way about refugees.
And it is something we've heard before. This isn't the first time we've heard this sort of language being used, whether it's by the media, by the government, previous governments. And it is this concept that concerns us, that it is dehumanising, Emma. And as I say, it's not the first time. And then we hear things like in The Guardian this week, one asylum seeker in Knowsley who said, "I fled Syria because of fear of death in my country, and now I'm living in fear here." That can't be right, though.
Well, certainly there will be people mixed in, some who are economic migrants. And also bear in mind that there are 140,000 applications that haven't been processed yet. We have no idea if those people have a claim to asylum or not. You know, I think that fundamentally you were saying that, you know, this is to do with the inflammatory language of the government. I think that, you know, that this is robbing normal people of their agency. The reason why they are frustrated is because of their experience. There's this whole sort of, I guess you could call it an elite narrative around this that is detached from the reality that people are experiencing on the ground of sexual harassment and other issues within the community where these migrants are being housed. And that's not necessarily the fault of the migrants. This is the fault of government policy. And this is their experience in their local areas that is making them frustrated. And I think actually to suggest that it's because the government's language is dehumanising or inflammatory is to ignore ignore the fact that this is a very real experience of people in particularly working class areas, and repeated successive governments basically ignoring the concerns of those people. And I think, and this is a point that was made by the columnist Alison Pearson in The Telegraph, if these migrants were being housed in, say, Barnes Common or in Leafy Hampstead, I think that we'd be hearing a very different story. I don't think that residents there would put up with a lot of the things that these people are dealing with in their local areas. And like I say, of course there will be some bad apples who are, housed in some of these migrant facilities. That's not to demonise all of them, but we have to listen to people's concerns and to not simply dismiss them as if they're robots who just respond to the call of the government to go out and protest. If anything, these people should be peacefully protesting outside of the Home Office.
The thing is that they're not, David, though, are they?
I think the fact is, I can agree with you, the policy needs to be sorted. But actually, I think the problem at the moment is that when you say that people coming on small boats are illegal, you criminalise them. And actually, if that's not dehumanising and demonising people, I don't know what is. And I think the point is that we need a new system for asylum. We've heard now talk about humanitarian visas, actually a chance to assess people's cases and give them the dignity to be able to come to this country, not in a small boat, not risking their life. I don't think people realise how much that journey that asylum seekers and refugees take, how dangerous it is all the way, wherever they aim for. And I think we need to say as a country, and I think most of the country don't want to dehumanise and criminalise refugees. We've got a proud history in this country of compassion. We've got a proud history of being there for when people need help. And that's, as a person of faith and people of all faiths, that's what we do. And many people who have no faith as well are as compassionate. And I see people wanting to help. And so therefore, I'd like to say to the government, let's stop this language about illegal routes. Let's actually create safe routes for everybody. And safe routes that are based on need, so that if somebody is fleeing persecution, is fleeing oppression, is fleeing war, we say, here's a visa, come to our country, come on a boat, come on a plane, be welcomed into the community. That's the sort of country that I want to see.
I think that's something that most people do agree on, that there is an issue. People want to help. People want people to be safe on both sides of this argument, no matter what you believe. But this letter this week, and it does specify specifically that the system is broken. I mean, do you agree with that?
It's broken in the sense that I think that the line between economic migrants and refugees genuinely fleeing various forms of persecution has become increasingly blurred. Unfortunately, we have an asylum system which has been reduced to a survival of the fittest system, where predominantly young, able-bodied men who are ultimately being imported into the country by people smuggling frameworks are undercutting the system. I want to see an asylum system which prioritises women and girls at risk of sex-based violence in their homelands. And at the moment, because of the ongoing situation, they're being left by the wayside. And I think another weakness of the system is that we have many Christian minorities, especially in Africa and Asia, who are at very serious risk of Islamist-led persecution. And I think that's a real weakness in our asylum system, in that they're not prioritised either.
It is a conversation that we could continue here all day without getting any results. And I know that we've had a huge response on social media as well. But thank you to all four of you for sharing your views on this today.